So in Unit 2, we're going to look at C Sharp and do an introduction to C Sharp. Since you already know Java, we're going to base our study of C Sharp on what you know of Java already. And this unit's really going to compare Java and materials in Java to C Sharp and just highlight mainly the differences, as well as I guess the similarities between the two. So that's what we're going to look at. There's a couple resources here. We're going to look in console applications. There are simple ways to create Windows forms or web forms, web pages. In C Sharp, we're not going to go into that. Here are two links to creating simple Hello World apps in those. You certainly don't have to look at those, but if you're interested in quickly jumping beyond the console applications we're going to look at right now, you might want to look at these two areas. We'll do the basics here, but again, if you want to do more study on C Sharp, there's a set of tutorials down here. These are entirely optional, but they just walk you through some of the beginning steps of C Sharp. Some of these compare C Sharp with Java, and some of them start from scratch for C Sharp. So if you feel your Java isn't that great, you want to go do some of these, feel free to try some of these out, these different tutorials here. But we're going to walk through a set of tutorials, a set of examples from Java 1 and Java 2 and convert them to C Sharp down below here. So that's what we're going to look at. The first one we're going to look at is the heart rate program from Java 1. So first we'll recreate this in Java. And actually, we'll just create a Hello World project to start. But I'll do a new project. We'll do a Java application, and I'll call this heart rate. Right, recorded, because I'm recording this. So I'm going to call this heart rate recorded here in the right spot and create this project. And then we'll just put in the beginning hello world example here where we just print out hello world. So all we're doing is system.out.println hello world in quotes to do our hello world. We can run that and it will print out hello world. So let's do the same thing in C Sharp. So I'm going to run Visual Studio. Here I'm running Visual Studio 2015. I'm going to do similar to the other one, a new project here. Now there are some options as far as C Sharp projects to go and which ones I want to start up. So there are these different templates. I want to make sure I'm under Visual C Sharp here, not some other language. And we'll be looking mainly at this Windows and web stuff here under Windows. We want to do a console application to start. Later on we'll try to get into the forms application, but the console application is just a simple application. So I'm going to call this heart rate record again and set this up. What we'll see frequently is that a lot of the code from Java can just be moved over to C Sharp with some changes, but one of the changes is the output, so we'll look at that. So if I go over here and grab my code for the output here and look here, okay, so here's my project that started in C Sharp Visual Studio. Okay, so Visual Studio started up here, and here's my program in my Solution Explorer to the left here. Okay, I just did an error here, but I reopened Visual Studio and it cleared it up. So here I've got my project created, and here's my program.cs. The .cs is for C Sharp, and that's our code here, and here's the display of the code. And again, we have a main routine, and inside that we're going to paste in our hello world method. But one thing we'll notice is that here in C Sharp, the input and outputs are going to be different. So in order to do an output, I'm going to say console.writeLine. And I can see as I type, some autocomplete will pop up here, but I can do console.writeLine. And now I can run this. So I can run this. It may take a while to rebuild it, but it'll run. It'll pop up window. Now that popped up really fast and disappeared. That's the default start is just to pop up a console, run the program, and assuming there's no input, it will close the program. So what you probably want to do to see that is to go to debug and say start without debugging. That'll open it up, run hello world, and then leave this, press any key to continue. Okay, so we want to do that. So let's just compare the overall structure of these two programs. In C Sharp, in Java, we have a package. This groups a bunch of related files together. In C Sharp, we have what's called a namespace, which does the same thing. In here, we say namespace and brackets. So it's a very similar structure to a class or a method with the brackets, where in Java, it's just that each file is assigned a package. We have a public class in Java, and the name of the class. Here we just have the word class and program, but we set that up when we're using brackets similarly. And the main's very similar. We have public static void main, and our argument is an array of strings. And again, static void main and array of strings. This is actually slightly different between the two, but very similar. One thing you will see is that the two languages sometimes will capitalize things, especially names of objects and built-in functions, differently between there. So like Java has a capital string here. Java will enforce this public. We'll put public more often than not. Here we could, again, the main doesn't have to be public for that. But other than that, so the structures are slightly different for the programs themselves. But we'll see the code itself is very similar. So let's take a look at that. First, let's run a bigger program, the actual heart rate program in Java. So I'm going to go out here, and again, here's some lists for comparing Java, and I have some just sample programs here. I have them here so we can just copy and paste them out here. So I'm going to grab this code. So I'm just going to grab this first section of code here and grab that out and paste it in here. So rather than where my hello world is, I'm just going to paste in that code for the heart rate. Oops, I grabbed too much code. So I don't want all the code. I just want the code under the main here. I don't want this whole thing. So just the code under the main, starting with that scanner and going down here to the last line. I don't need the brackets because I'm going to just keep the brackets that are in this main here and paste that in. The scanner is coming up here as an error. Because it's not listed above, and I can hit Alt Enter here and say import scanner, and it'll import it here. And in fact, in my program, we'll see that that is up here, import Java util scanner. So that's Alt Enter will import it here. And so this should run fine. When I run this, it'll enter my age. I can enter an age, and it'll tell me that person's age and information about that person's heart rate for exercising. Okay, so now I'm going to take the same code that's in Java and just copy and paste it over into C# and see how that goes. One of the interesting things about Java and C# is that C# is based on Java and actually much closer to Java than another common language, JavaScript. A lot of people think JavaScript is very similar to Java, but it's not. The names just are, where C# was Microsoft's design to basically replicate Java and its popularity. So very similar language structure. Okay, so again, whenever I see the inputs and outputs here, I'm going to have to watch those. So simple, if I see like a Java a print line, that's got to be a console dot write line. Similarly, if it's a print, so I'm not going to go to the next line, I can do a console dot write, not a write line. So those are my two main things, is the console.write line and the console.write that I can replace the print and the print lines with. But the way we declare variables is very similar to the way we assign variables. All the arithmetic operations are very similar here. The only thing you will run into sometimes if you use things like math constants or like absolute value and built-in math functions, they're often different in case, so they may be capitalized in C# where they're not in Java. Okay. Now this scanner I don't necessarily need up here for input, so my output's good, but my input's a little different. So I don't need the scanner up here. I'm not going to use that. But the way I read in inputs is a little different here. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to use this simple example. It's not going to work initially, but we'll talk about that. So very similar to here where we're using our scanner, as I can say age, where in Java I said age equals scanner.nextInt. Here I can say age equals console.read. In the same way I did console.write, I can do console.read and read in the console here. And this will read in characters from the console, one character at a time. And you think this is going to work. We have an integer up here, but we'll see in a sec that it actually won't work. So I'm going to run it again. Actually, I need to run it with out debugging. Enter my age. I'm going to enter an age here and hit enter. And it seems to work fine, except when I notice that these numbers are all wrong. And in fact, I entered age 88 and it said a 56-year-old person here. So the problem is that it read these numbers, read the 8 in and converted it in using ASCII or Unicode format to an ASCII value of 56 rather than a numeric value. So it did a conversion, but not the right one for us. We've got to do a little different way of reading in and converting integers, and this is one area that it gets a little more complicated, but not too bad. So rather than just saying console.read, we're going to do a console.read line and read an entire string in, that whole line in. And that's going to be a string. So I could store that in a string variable and then do a convert later on. But I'm going to do it all in one step. I'm going to read that in as a string, and then I'm going to put a convert. There's a special convert method here, and convert that string into an integer. In this case, an int32. There are different size integers, of course, in both languages, and this int is an int32. So this is what I have to do, a convert int.32, and inside that do my console.read line, not just read, but reads it in a single character. So once I've set that up, this should run the same. And I keep wanting to do that. Let me switch here and run this without debugging so I can see this window pop up. So now I can enter my age, and it'll tell me the correct age and do the correct calculations here. So as we can see, the way we declare integers, doubles, variables like that are all the same. Even similar ways we say strings, the way we assign variables, the way we do calculations are all the same here. Arithmetic operations and stuff like that are the same. Let's look at some structure like some if-then statements. So the next thing we're going to go over is the cell phone plan example from Java 1, where we're doing some if-then and some more complicated calculations here, and look at that. So again, let's bring that up in C#. I'm just going to do a new project here and call this cell phone record. So I got my phone here, and I'm going to take this code, this cell phone code here. I'm just going to take this all out here and talk a little bit about this again. Paste that whole code in after this for a quick comparison. To remind ourselves that we've got a class here in Java. The name of the class has to match the name of the file. So here I'm going to leave the public class up here and move this up here and make sure that uh, whatever class I have is called the right thing here. I also want to make sure I leave the package definition here, and because the way NetBeans works with packages and that means it's in a folder, so I'm going to leave that package there. So I want to make sure I've got the package straight. The import can be added later, but that's here, and then the public class cell phone. Okay, so I've set this up to run fine, so I can run this cell phone app. So how many minutes did I use? How much data did I use? And it'll calculate my bill. So again, we can do the same thing in C#. I'm going to do a new project. Make sure I'm in the console project and give it some name. Now, by default, these are stored in your user folder under your name. I'm logged in as CSS user here in your documents folder under Visual Studio 2015 and under projects there. So each project is stored in its own folder there. So I've got my cell phone area here. I've set that up. And again, similar here to NetBeans, I'll have the list of my files over here, and my main program is always called program.cs by default over here. And so I can take this code from Java. I'm just going to take everything inside the main routine. I'm not going to take the main routine because it's, again, slightly different format, the capital M and the lowercase m here. But I can paste the code in here. And just like before, I'll notice problems with the print lines. I'll switch those to console dot write lines and set those up. So I'll go through change those. But that's the main thing we'll see here. So I'm just go through and change the right lines here. The other thing I'll see is, again, the inputs are slightly different. I'm reading in these integers, and so similar to before, I can change how I'm going to grab those with my convert and my read lines. So I'm going to do this convert and then a read line rather than the console next int. So again, that's a little different. But again, the way I declare variables, and here the if-then structures, how I structure if-thens with brackets and stuff, that's all the same. The else's are all the same. Things like plus equals are the same, parentheses are the same, all the structure is the same. So all these if-thens will work just fine in C# as they did in Java. So you'll see little difference when you're writing code like this for between C# and Java. And this should run fine as is then. And it'll run just fine. Of course, I keep forgetting to run it with debug, so it closes automatically. Okay, so that's gets you into if-thens and stuff like that. Let's look at multiple classes and methods and objects and how we do that. So we're going to look at this hokey pokey method, and I'm going to recreate these also so you can see how we create multiple classes. So let's jump back into NetBeans and Java. I'm going to do a new project, Java project. I'm going to call this Hokey Pokey Song. And I have a generic class here, and I'm going to paste in my code into the main area that's here. Now, my main routine just creates another object and calls methods from that other object. So that's what we're going to get into here, is how do we create another object and call methods for that. So again, here I'm here with the hokey pokey object, and I haven't defined this. It should be in a separate class over here, and so I should be able to see that. And so I can actually, I could create a new class, but under my help methods here, it is just create a new package or a new class. Here I'm just going to create this this top one because I want it in the same package as I met. Okay, so that created another file over here for my object, my hokey pokey object, and I'm going to just grab the methods here for that. So here's my public class hokey pokey, and I'm just going to grab the methods here and paste that in. So I have a refrain method and a verse method, and then a full song method that'll declare the full song. So I've set that up in my hokey pokey class. I did forget also in in my main class here, I have a second object here, a sing method, and so I can just show you how to declare a sing method in both Java and C#. So I can just declare a method outside another method here. Okay, so here's how it's set up, and this should be stuff you should remember from Java 1 and Java 2. I have a class. I have two classes. Here's my song class, and then my hokey pokey class here. I'm creating a hokey pokey object. Again, hokey pokey, the name of the class, song is the object name, and then saying new and calling the constructor for that. And once I have that object, I can call the method. So I can say verse and call the verse, or refrain and call the refrain. And I can pass in parameters as needed using parentheses, so I can declare the formal parameters here and pass in actual parameters here to the different verses and set this up to work. So this should sing the hokey pokey song for me and display all the information, do that. So let's look at recreating this with these sorts of classes in C# and how that's different. And pleasantly, it's mainly the same. So I'm going to do a new project. So I've got my main object here, and inside main I'm just going to go back to C# here, grab the code that's inside this main, and copy it and post it into here. And it'll paste in fine. There's actually very few changes. Now there's an error here where this is not defined, and that's the same as before. I'm also going to paste in this other method. So again, we had another method here. And we can just copy and paste that in the way we define a new method. Works fine in both places. So one thing I also note is comments. Comments work the same. You can have a / comment or a /* comment. Java docs like comments here work, but they don't have any special meaning in C#. In fact, in C#, we will have a special comment that'll be actually 3 slashes. So if you hit 3 slashes, it'll put this all in place, and that's how we'll do our version of Java docs, is using 3 slashes, and it'll set this all up for us. Okay, so we've got our main method here. We're declaring a new object, but again, we don't have this object. If I look over here at the list of classes, there's only the main program here. There's not a hokey pokey. So I could go up to project and add a new class here. I could right click over here and do new, add a new class, add. That's going off your screen, but there's a new class option there. But just like in NetBeans, there's also a little idea suggestion box here for errors. And first one is generate a new class. I'm just going to right click there and I'll generate my hokey pokey class. So now if I double click on that, it'll open it up. And this is just a class that's ready to go here, but it has nothing in it. So, but my code from Java, all this code will just copy directly over there. So I can just grab all this code and paste it over here. So the way I define methods and things work. Now again, I'm running problems with the outputs. So that's still an issue. That I typed in there. Now, one thing I will notice is that console is not defined. The reason is that console is defined in this system method. So we need this using system. So one thing is different again in Java. When we are including things, we would do a import, Java import of something. In C Sharp, it's a little different. I have a using up here. When you create a new class, it's empty. It doesn't have any usings in here. So again, it's seeing this console, not saying anything. So I can add this using here, and I'll put the using up here. So I'm just going to go through and change the console write lines. Okay, so I've changed the system.print to console.write lines. So this will work. But again, the way I declare a method and set that up, the way I declare parameters and set that up are all the same. And then again, the way I declare an object, I could say the object name, the variable I'm using to store that object, and then I instantiate it. I say equals new, and then call a constructor for that object. So that's all the same. And once I have an object, I can use that thing and call different methods, just the name of the object dot, and then verse to call the verse method, or refrain to call the refrain methods here. So all that works the same. So the way objects are set up and structured is very similar between Java and C Sharp, which is nice. And now if I run this, it will run just like the other one and display the hokey pokey. Okay, the last one we're going to look at is arrays and array lists. And so at this point, rather than showing you code here, I'm going to open that up. We've done enough of this, creating things from scratch. So I'm going to open up this array demo in both languages here. The 2087 is the Java one, and the array demo stuff zip file is the C# from. So I'm going to open those, download those up, and open those both up. So I'm opening these both up in C#. I can find the folder, and so the folder creates all the information. Inside that is a solution file, an SLN file, which you can double click on and open up Visual Studio, or here I can open it up, and that will reference the rest of the files in that folder. So I'm going to open up that solution here and look at that. So let's go back to this. So in this is a 2087 array demo, and so we've got this main class which creates two different objects, one using arrays, an array demo object, and runs that demo, and then another demo using array lists creates that. The array list object creates an array of strings, an array of my points, and sets those up. Defines the days, the array of strings, and sets that up, and prints that, calls a print method to print those out down here. Also sets up an array of my points, and my points is a separate object over here. It says object with an X and a Y, and then some methods to handle that. So again, a somewhat complicated setup here, but amazingly similar to how we do it in C#. So again, we'll look at that same project over in C#. So the main program is just called program. And again, I can create an array demo here and create an object for that and call the test methods for that object. In array demo, Again, I can declare an array of strings, an array of points. So again, that's very similar to how I'm doing it here. Same exact syntax for the array of strings and array of points. And here's my method. So how I instantiate an array is the same, and how I can assign each element in the array is the same here. So that's just the same in both languages. I can just copy and paste that code. How I pass an array as a parameter is the same. So here I'm printing out my array. This method for printing out array for int I equals 0, I less than a dot length, I plus plus, console.writeLine. That's very similar to the method over here. Again, the only difference is the system.print. But again, the way I'm passing in the parameter array and the way I loop through here, in fact, array length is the same. Now, one difference here is that in C# we have a capitalization. Again, we see that a couple times. So rather than saying a dot lowercase length, it's a dot uppercase length. So that is a little different here. But again, we'll see that frequently. It's just a capitalization difference for that. So I can loop through the array the same way. Similarly, when I create an array of points, here I'm creating an array of 4 points, and each one I'm instantiating a new point, calling the constructor for that point and storing those points in the array, passing that array here to a method, and then passing out a whole array to another method, and my methods here very similar. So how I declare this and set this up is the same basically in so this sort of language here, the declaring of an array of objects, instantiating each object and storing in the array, passing that array to a method. These methods are the same. Here, again, the only thing different is that when I loop through here, the length as a capital L. And in fact, here where I'm referencing that length inside a calculation, that's different. But again, everything else is exactly the same between these two. So arrays in C# and arrays in Java are nearly identical. Now let's look at ArrayLists, because actually you should probably be using ArrayLists or lists more than you do ArrayLists. So here's our ArrayList demo. So we create an ArrayList of type string, another ArrayList of type myPoint, and here we're using templating to specify what type of this ArrayList here. And then now once we have an array list created, we have to use that the name of the array .add to add elements to that, or points.add to add that. And again, to access that array in Java, we say the array name.get and then the index for that. So let's look at that same sort of setup in C#. So the way we set up an array list is somewhat similar, but there's no types for an array list here. So I just say array list days and say a new array list. I can't specify the type like string or points here. So this is a little different. Again, I can then add, and I see some capitalization issues here. It's a uppercase A for adding to it. Similarly, for declaring an array of points and setting that up, and setting up the array of points is a little different for this. And again, length will be a little different as I go. So we're going to look at changing it. So one of our issues we have is that array lists in C# are not typed. So I have these two different array lists, and they're not typed. And I wouldn't run into much problems with this code unless I had these two different arrays. And so what I get into the problem is I have two methods here, print array and print array, and they both have the exact same parameter, where in Java I had these and they were slightly different because, again, the array lists were typed. So array lists in C Sharp are not typed. There is another type which we'll use frequently in C Sharp that is just a list. So if I change this rather from a list to an array list, I mean array list to a list, that will work out. And then I have to type the type of array. So I can say list of string and set that up here. So rather than using an array list, we'll use something called a list, at least when we need typing, to type the different values here. So again, rather than saying just array list days, similar to what I do in Java, I'm going to say private list and then specify the type and then I'll instantiate the same way as I do in Java. And I'll have to make sure wherever I use that as a parameter here, I want to do the same thing when I pass in the different parameter values. So let's talk about looping then through an array, I mean a list, rather than array list. So I have this array, I have this loop. So there's no length, either capital or lowercase in lists. The variable or the method that you want to use is count. So I'm just going to say a dot count with a capital C to give me that attribute to loop through it. And then I can access each element of the array just like normal. So I can change all my loops, just have to change the length to count and loop through it. Now you can do this, but again, with array lists, we generally try to avoid these for loops and switch to a for each. So let's look at that. So C# has a for each loop. So rather than saying for int and having a counter set up here, I can just simply say for each and then declare a variable string s in a. So a is an array or list of strings, and so this will loop through, set s equal to each element in a incrementally. So it makes quick reference, and I can just say console.writeLine s to print out the current string that I'm looking at. Just like apologize here, I'm using these generic names s and a for string and array, simply because I don't have an application here. But in real world, I would be using more real meaningful names for my variables. So again, there's a for each loop here that we'll actually use more often than the for loop in here. Now, Java, I don't know if you've been using the for each loop in Java, but initially you may have learned the for loop, but there's a for each loop, and you should probably be using that a lot more than you are in Java also. So we'll be moving a lot of our things to that. Now, there are times when you might actually need a for loop to do, especially when you're doing some count or some calculations, but a lot of times you can get by without with using a for each loop for that. Okay, so using arrays of objects, arrays of strings, passing them, converting from an array list to a list here. They're all very similar to do. And so we won't see much difference between arrays or array lists as long as we use the lists in C#. So that concludes our comparison of Java to C#. Hopefully you'll find a smooth transition from Java to C#. And from now on, we'll just try to highlight the unique features of C#. I've included a quick summary here of some of the things, like I say, that I didn't mention, like Boolean goes to bool here. We mentioned some of the different things as far as the name of some of the properties are capitalized, as far as, and then like things like date go to date time. So there are some slight differences here, but very few, and we'll try to make sure we point those out throughout this course.